Mr. Secretary, Excellencies, as the Finnish ambassador has also arrived. It's really a pleasure to have this opportunity to address this distinguished audience. When I was on my flight over here, I came to think about this notion, sovereign debt. And I sort of came to the conclusion that isn't it a paradox? Sovereign debt and the debate about sovereign debts and defaults. But there are lots of these type of very tempting items which would be very nice to discuss. Particularly, I would like to provoke some within the audience that when it is rightly questioned, particularly in London, that is it really that the regulation is the way to solve the present challenges? I would say from the continental point of view, it's partly this type of asymmetric derives out of the fact nobody is giving us the opportunity to enforce. And the present situation is not about the content of our joint commitments within the Europe, it's the lack of enforcement of the existing obligations. Now, being a representative of the only Nordic committed to Euro, it makes it, in a way, rather serious from our point of view. But let me start by giving a very positive tone to this growing public debts. It will enforce us. It will lead into a situation where the restructuration will be deeper and more efficient than otherwise. So, I mean, I already see the positive noises, at least on the European leaders' level, to turn to the question of restructuration of our whole economies. But what I will discuss is, of course, practicalities. First of all, very shortly about my company. It's the biggest private pension insurance company in Finland with 850,000 individual responsibilities. And we are now, for the moment, as I left Finland, slightly about 31 billion in investment portfolio, and we are about 600 people working with this responsibility. We operate on the basis of scenarios, and it is, of course, particularly important also with the view of our responsibilities towards our governance to have the support in turbulent times and to have the background for the choices made in the given situation. And these are the basic three scenarios on the basis of which we make our strategic allocation decisions and run our practical decision making. And we are among those believing in this consensus vision, a weak Europe, satisfactory or good growth in Asia and in the US, low interest rate. Sovereign debt crisis will be very slow to unwind, and we will have a low inflation. But at the same time, we of course have to be very alert and prepared to make moves if other scenarios will increase in probabilities. What I tried to illustrate to you, even if I'm going to end with some remarks on the sovereign debt, that this situation is also very challenging. Reference was made to the Nordic welfare state. The European approach in the Middle Ages was that the help comes from above. And now we are, at least as investors, to a very large extent expecting that we can save our welfare state with the external demand and growth. This is a reference to actually last year. The Finnish pension system recovered very well, and I would say that even the slowest had recovered the losses of 2008 within the first quarter of this year. The black figures reflect the stock prices in the Nasdaq OMX Helsinki, the red ones in Eurozone, and the blue ones in the US S&P 500. But as we can note, the volatility remains very high still. This about the bonds, I would say that with a very humble mind, I must say that my company had a very reserved view already before the crisis on certain European bonds, and we have been concentrating ourselves on two countries, Germany and Finland. But if you look at the development within the time span of 15 years of the German 10-year government bond yields and compare that to the Japanese, there are lots of similarities. And the German yields approaching 2%. The question arises, is it sufficient for the purposes of our interest, our operations? And the reply is that maybe not. Then about the external helps. Even if we received yesterday or day before yesterday first, in a long period of time, first positive news about the US unemployment, I think this is a dramatic slide which demonstrates that if as the company's profits have been dramatically improving in the US, it doesn't have to have a direct impact or less impact than perhaps ever before on the employment rate in the US. In the Finnish situation, the first 6 months have indicated relatively good growth figures, but within these figures there are of course very mixed elements. First of all, the industrial production volumes increased. They increased particularly in the forest industries, metals and manufacturing industries, but they were still dramatically lower in the ICT industries compared with 2009. And very much of this demand is of such nature that it is actually external demand, particularly demand from the Asian markets, which will lead in the longer run to a stronger than ever wave of investments out from Europe to these Asian markets. So it is from the Finnish point of view, it's a very serious question that even if the best of our international global operations are dramatically improving their performance, it will help the Finnish economy to a lesser and lesser degree to recover. Employment has ceased to weaken. It has clearly turned out, but unfortunately also to a large extent based on the aging of the Finnish workforce, which leads into a situation where the labor force supply to the market is dramatically decreasing. So the number of employed is not, in volume terms, growing dramatically or almost at all.